This is the story of Banana Bedard. One ghost remains. The recent demise of Julian Demers, and last year the untimely death of Raymond Bedard, Banana, my two teenage friends from the early 30s, reminded me of one of our greatest teenage adventures. I wonder how many persons living in the St. Johnsbury area will remember the following story. As I recall, it happened in the time frame of 1931 to 1933. The stage was the Gilman's barn, owned by Mr. Gilman and later by his two sons, Steve and Paul. I do not recall much about Mr. Gilman, except that he was a tall, dark man and very upset because we trespassed on his property. The barn, abandoned at the time, was located on the southeast corner of what is now the Little League baseball field near the railroad tracks. At times, it was used by bootleggers to hide hot booze and sometimes by late-night gamblers. Area residents often took the shortcut from Cody's Court along the railroad tracks by the barn and then entered Portland Street between the Connolly Plumbing and the Dion Welding shops. At night, the barn was an eerie sight. Even in moonlight, it looked like something unnatural resided there. Many avoided this dark, spooky area. The brave ones who took the shortcut at night always walked a little faster by the barn and breathed a sigh of relief when they reached lighted Portland Street. This was before the overpass was constructed over the two railroad tracks and the Passumpsic River. Well, my buddies and I decided that this barn needed residents in the form of ghosts. We proceeded to supply 3, and for about 1 week we had the time of our lives. An old gooseneck horn removed from an early model radio was used to make the most ungodly, unworldly, unholy sound you ever heard. Anyone hearing this sound could easily imagine a poor soul in hell moaning in anguish and pain and rising from the dark recesses of the barn to take vengeance. Each night after supper, the 3 of us would enter the barn and wait for darkness. The barn was built in 3 levels. We occupied the top floor, and each night Banana, because he was the smallest, would climb up inside the cupola, where he had a 360-degree view of the area. From this vantage point, he would signal us to get ready whenever potential victims were spotted. Then, at the victim's closest approach to the barn, we would emit a low moan with the horn. That was all it took to put full-grown adults in flight. We took this to be a lot of fun and laughed until our insides ached. One night, Herb Connolly and Harley Page decided to come down and see what this was all about. We saw them coming and waited till they got close to the barn. We gave them the usual unholy sound and watched them take off. It was too dark to tell who was running the fastest. In daytime and at school, we innocently associated with our peers and heard all their remarks about the ghosts who inhabited Gilman's barn. They never suspected we were the ghosts. Consequently, we learned about their plans to storm the barn with a large group of kids. We were ready for them. There must have been 30 kids armed with clubs and stones. We watched them swarm around the area and waited until they were close enough to touch the barn. Suddenly, they heard a sound that made their skin crawl and hair stand on end. The exodus was complete. Not a single one remained. The bravest ones were leading the flight. Indeed, all were convinced that something evil resided in that barn. Blinded by success, our teenage minds failed to anticipate the course of events that would follow. We should have accepted our success, destroyed all evidence, and abandoned our project. Rumors of ghosts would have lingered to this day. Not so, however. We continued frightening neighbors until our short-sightedness resulted in complaints by nearby residents to the police and the demise of the ghost. One night, after we were all set up, a group of citizens led by the Chief of Police, James Christie, in his new paddy wagon surrounded the barn and cornered us. Chief Christie entered the barn brandishing a chrome revolver and escorted us out with our hands in the air to his new paddy wagon, in use for the first time. I've often wondered what the chief would have done Had we thrown a sinister moan at him before he entered the barn? We were, of course, threatened with reform school. However, the whole thing eventually blew over as the pranks of kids, and the three of us grew up to be responsible citizens. Julian retired from the Air Force after a military career. He flew fighter planes in the European theater during World War II. Raymond was a bomber pilot during the war, and he worked in civilian life for a telephone company. I was a flight radio officer in the Air Transport Command and retired in 1980 from Martin Marietta Corporation, an aerospace firm in Orlando, Florida. Since I'm the remaining live ghost, I wanted to share this story with anyone who may remember and was terrified by the ghosts in Gilman's barn. This article was in the Caledonian newspaper, and it was written by Larry LePan, who lives in Orlando, Florida. It was one of the favorite tales of Grammy Roy, who would tell it to her grandchildren and great-grandchildren for years after it was printed.